All right, it's Sunday night, and I'm back with another BRAP rant. Did a BRAP rant on Friday discussing the price increase announced by Sony for the PlayStation 5 in certain parts of the world, not here in the United States, though, but definitely in Canada and Mexico and North America and other parts, again, in Europe and Asia as well. So just want to kind of do a BRAP rant, kind of talk about the, kind of gauge the temperature, the reaction of people, in Twitter, from podcasts I've been listening to today about, well, not today, but the last couple of days, with some of the thoughts around this particular price increase by Sony. And so with me, I have Game Logic, who just wrapped up his show. So Logic, thanks for joining. It was kind of like at the 11th hour that I, said, hey, are you available for a BRAP rant? You said, yeah. Maybe I'm available after my show, so thank you, man. I really appreciate it. But yeah, Game Logic. This won't be a long rant. Kind of just talk about some of the feedback and that I've been hearing, and maybe you've been seeing or hearing as well, as relates to the PlayStation 5 increase. But yeah, man. So Logic, thank you, sir. I appreciate your time as always, man.
Yeah, no problem, man. It was wonderfully convenient because I just hit the end scene and then closed out of my Discord call for my show, and then just flipped over here to your channel to get into the next one.
Exactly. So yeah, so there's been a lot of conversation around this PlayStation 5 increase. I was on Crossfire, talked about it. Mooch was like, "Hey, Brap, what do you think about this?" I'm like, frankly, I don't care. I don't think it's a big deal. I don't understand some of the emotion behind it. And look, I again, it's, as a consumer, I can tell you that I'm not a fan of price increases, like most consumers probably aren't. I am not. But again, I don't understand, and one of the reasons I want to have this rant is because there seems to be a narrative out there that when you explain why these things happen, that you're somehow defending these things. And it's like, no, it's not what's happening. It's just, we're just talking about why these things are happening. We did a rant with David Faulkner, who's a financial analyst who, it's weird because we had David on last weekend, and then a few days later, the increase happened. And David kind of broke down and, kind of how companies make decisions and how, what affects pricing to consumers, things of that. And, I wanted to talk about that because I think there's a lot of misconceptions from consumers, with kind of how the sausage is made, I guess. I'll steal a David Jaffe term. There's a major disconnect. And Forte, I don't know if you're listening, man. You're getting roasted on Wednesday, sir. Yeah, it's just it's interesting. Like some of the feedback that I've been seeing, and even some of the stuff in the live chat I saw on Crossfire this past Friday when I was discussing kind of the economic realities, why this happened. Sony kind of talked about it, and people were saying, well, they made record. Their PlayStation 5 console was making money for them. They've already tacked on additional $10 for games. But there's a little more to that, right? Game Logic, that is, the inflation thing is real. It's impacting a lot of companies, not just Sony. And again, I'm not saying this. It's crazy I have to say this, Game Logic. I'm not saying this to make excuses for Sony. I'm just talking about the economic realities, the world that we're in right now, and the fact that, look, inflation is a real thing. It's impacting consumers and businesses. CNBC just had an article, that came out. This is funny. This article came out January 1st, 2022, released at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, to be precise, by Jessica Dickler. And again, this is New Year's Day, 2022, this year. 10 things that will be more expensive in 2022, and this pertains to the inflation, that we started seeing early this year as a result of the pandemic, the ongoing supply chain issues. So I'm going to read the top 10. Housing being number one. So we've seen that, right, Logic? We've seen the increase of housing going up. We're also seeing the increase of higher interest rates, which I don't know. I haven't done any, and I don't know. Maybe Logic, if you've seen any numbers on housing recently, I have not. I don't know if the housing market's kind of what it looks like. This time. I don't know what it looks like year over year. I don't know if it's kind of if it's dampened a little bit, but I know prior to the pandemic, I mean, housing was going fucking gangbusters. Like, it was nuts. The value of my home in a matter of jumped like $200,000 in 3 years. Like, that's pretty aggressive. Bidding wars. Go ahead.
My home is about 160, about 170 grand, worth 160, 170 grand more than I paid for it now.
Yeah, that's mine, about 200 grand more. Yeah. And I mean, like, and we bought right before, we bought 2018, the house we live in, right before like the bidding wars really started happening. But yeah, I mean, housing, I mean, there was people were outbidding each other. It was nuts. Food we know about. Food's gone up. So that's number 2 in this list. Clothing being number 3. That was number 3 on CNBC's 10 things that will be more expensive in 2022. Heating costs, number 4, which we've seen that. Gas at number 5, which has been the biggest driver of inflation. Dining out, number 6. So restaurants. That's gone up. That was number 6 on this list. Cars, number 7. Cars. The price of cars went up 31.4% year over year. 8, computers and electronics. So that includes computers, TVs, video game consoles. 9, furniture. It's interesting furniture on that list, by the way. And number 10, medical care. So healthcare is up 8.4% from 2020. All right. So Logic, why do I bring these things up? Look, again, I bring these things up and not as a way to, excuse Sony's pricing or say it's okay. It's more so to, subtract the emotion out of this and insert some reality into this conversation that this is what happens when you have things like inflation, when you have supply chain impacted. These are things that get passed on. Like I've actually seen people say that what Sony's doing is unprecedented, like that they couldn't believe that they were passing on the expense to consumers. And I'm like, well, no, that's not unprecedented. And again, this is not to say that what Sony's doing is, I'm justifying what Sony's doing. It's only to explain why these things happen. Like it's, this happens everywhere. And again, it's not to say that, I guess for me, it's frustrating when you say that and then people are like, "Oh, well, you're okay with this." And no, I've never said I was okay with it. I don't want to pay more if I don't have to. Nobody does. But I also understand. And actually, Froggy writes says it's unprecedented for a console. That is not true, Froggy. Sony actually increased the cost of the PlayStation 4 in 2014 by $50 Canadian in Canada, and Microsoft just increased the price of the Series X console in India, citing currency exchange rates. So this is not unprecedented. It's happened before. Go ahead.
And let's also put that in context, right? Despite the fact that that those prices have, are increasing, those are not the most expensive prices on the planet that people are paying, right? The cost of the PlayStation 5 when it launched in Brazil was the equivalent of $1,850, right? Let's revisit that. The price of the PlayStation 5 when it launched in Brazil was easily the cost. Like, you can buy a PC with a 3080 Ti in it right now for that price. The prices in these countries where a lot of these things are increasing are still countries where the price of a PlayStation 5 in its US dollar equivalent is still below the 50% line of what every other country is paying, right? The cost of the US dollar increase for some of these countries is an additional 33 or 37 US dollars, right? So the criticality or the extremity to which these price increases are happening still don't drive it to a significant threshold shift in comparison to what other places around the rest of the world are paying.
Sorry, man. So Froggy's saying that it's he's talking about across the board increases that's unprecedented.
It's not an across the board increase. It's increases where the US dollar is incredibly strong. Right, in comparison to its historical precedent, the U.S. dollar has typically been worth half of a British pound. The U.S. dollar historically has been, the euro has tended to be 1.5 or 1.7 times what a U.S. dollar is worth. So they are making adjustments for those foreign exchange rates, as well as contending with supply chain contention around the world. So, again, to follow the breadcrumbs, right? When a company reports its quarterly earnings, it then issues guidance for the following quarters and as far out as the following year. When those numbers are based on them selling a PlayStation 5 in a country for $500 US, and then over time, foreign exchange rates change so that console being sold in another country is actually only being sold for $450 or $400, that then impacts guidance. Investors don't like shifts in actuals from guidance, whether positive or negative. You actually get penalized on Wall Street through investors when you actually overachieve because people feel that you are not good at predicting your financial future. Investors are then angry because they felt like if you would have told them that you were going to actually issue more earnings per share than your guidance predicted, then they would have actually invested more money in your company. And it will lead those investors to actually go invest their money elsewhere with someone who is more accurate and more consistent in their predictions. And so one of the ways of compensating for achieving guidance when there are financial and economic changes in the world is to change prices, right? Amongst many other things.
Yeah, no, and that's a great point. Like, it's again, like to Froggy's, what Froggy is saying, and kind of what you have said is that, the price increases happen in regions where the U.S. dollar is basically like bodying that currency, where, I don't think I think it's probably maybe 20 years since the U.S. dollar has been, has really been higher than the euro, if I'm not mistaken. Is that, I don't know if you have any,
yeah, I mean, I can't quote it like to the date, but I mean, in general, if I look at the trend over the last, year, the U.S. dollar has slowly been gaining strength. And so, other currencies have been coming down in strength from my own personal experience, right? Again, having traveled and lived in Europe and spent time around Great Britain and in the European Union, when I was going through those parts of the world, right, the U.S. dollar, it sucked, right? Just the U.S. dollar didn't buy a whole heck of a lot, right, in those other countries.
Yeah. So now, and to your point, what you're saying is, so with inflation, the impact inflation has had in some of these territories where Sony's selling a PlayStation 5, which would normally be $5, with the inflation, now it's more like they're selling it at $450, right?
Correct. And further extrapolating things are purchasing of raw materials, right? So, you quoted the article from CNN. So just a few days ago, there was an additional article posted over at Tech News World, right? And so back in June, TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, one of the largest foundries, right, maintainer of foundries and fabrication plants in the world. In fact, they are the largest semiconductor foundry in the world, announced price increases starting in 2023. That round of price increases was followed by Intel, who also jacked their prices. In turn, Marvell and Qualcomm also jacked their prices. And so just about all of the semiconductor companies who sell raw materials to plants like Foxconn and other places that assemble a lot of these electronics are increasing the prices of those ODM components. In many cases, the manufacturing plants that are recipients of those supplies are passing those price hikes on to those consumers. So their consumers are the Sonys and the Microsofts. And in some cases, Sony and Microsoft are passing that on. I think one of the things that often gets left out of the conversation is we often talk about all of these large companies as if they are suppliers. They are not solely suppliers.
They're consumers.
They're also buyers.
I was just about to say that. Like, it's a trickle-down effect. Like, they're consumers too.
Right. And and not only are they buyers, but one of the key things we're going to talk about is buyer competition. We often leave that out of the conversation. Buyers are in competition for products in scarce supply. Those buyers, right, Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, in some cases are also competing for supply. In some cases, some of those companies have better relationships, better deals, longer term deals, bigger volume deals, right, with those suppliers than another company might. And so again, a lot of people have thrown out this conjecture that, well, Microsoft isn't doing it and Nintendo's not doing it. And I'm like, I mean, my optic, if I were at Sony, what I would say is, so what, right? Those companies aren't Sony. They have different relationships and different dynamics that they're responding to. And so it's not, I mean, anyone who says something like that just clearly, from my opinion, hasn't worked in the corporate world, has never been in a boardroom where those types of decisions are being made, has never briefed a C-level officer, and just doesn't get it, right? One of the first things you will hear in any boardroom when somebody says, so-and-so is doing this and so-and-so is doing that, you will quickly hear from senior level directors, right? You will quickly hear the so what, who gives a crap, they're not us. We're running our business, we're not running theirs.
Yeah, and actually that's actually really, that's a great point, because I've heard that in my company and with meetings where they're like, yeah, we're not them. This is what we do. This is our value proposition. And this is what we're sticking to. That's a nice way of putting it too. But Casual Gamer actually kind of brings up that point. Like, he's like, the same rules of finance apply to Microsoft and Nintendo, but they chose to be more consumer friendly. That's the issue for most consumers. And this is the issue that I have with these conclusions, right? And you hear me say game logic, the jump to conclusion, Matt, right? People are bringing out their jump to conclusion, Matt. They think because it makes sense in their brain that in fact is what's happening behind the scenes. And it's not. Like, we had David Faulkner on this past week ago, and I was speaking to him behind the scenes. And David, you should give him a follow on Twitter if you haven't done so already. Oh, and by the way, Froggy, right? I'll address the down cost of the PS5. Instead, it was making a profit on hardware alone. I'll talk about that in a second here, and we'll tell you how the. Go ahead, Logic.
Yeah, and hey, I'm just going to say one thing to the chat, right? Because we seem to do this every time. If you guys are going to bring up a thing, and state it as a reason why you're disagreeing with us, I'm fine with that. Cite your source. I'm not going off all over the internet trying to figure out where, like, somebody said the PlayStation 5 was making a profit on the hardware alone. I don't know where that was said. It should be easy to find. They do quarterly earnings statements. They have sites with all their financial investor information.
I think Sony had said that early on or something. They were making a little bit of profit. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the supply cost of the PlayStation 5 at launch was around $450, right? And then when you add in shipping, manufacturing, taxes, all that, that probably put it up to $470. So, and also don't forget, right, there's the price of the console, but then there's also compensating for the expense of the R&D that went into it. That is carried as an expense on their balance sheet, and that expense needs to be depreciated, right, and amortized over time. And so part of the sale, right, has to go to basically to pay that off. So I don't know if, if that means it's profitable or not.
Yeah. So to what Casual Gamer's saying, like the rules of finance apply to Microsoft and Nintendo. So if you heard us earlier, Casual Gamer, we're talking about the strength of the U.S. dollar. Microsoft's in a great position right now. Look, I mean, they're backed by the U.S. dollar, and so if you think about the increased cost in manufacturing in China, I think David Faulkner, I think he said the increased manufacturing cost in China is 30%. You got to remember, China's still, I believe they're still in lockdown from COVID. So you think about the impact that has in supply chain, and then the cost, right? We talk about supply and demand. The cost of these parts, at least for Nintendo's going to be cheaper because they're using older hardware. Nintendo also had a $50 console, a revised console with the Switch OLED. But again, Nintendo is paying less in terms of parts because they're older parts and not as demand as the parts that Microsoft and Sony are essentially like competing for. They're competing in the market to get the parts that make the PlayStation 5 and the Series X. So when you think about the cost, the manufacturing costs, right, have gone up 30%. This is according to David Faulkner. If someone else has other numbers, please share that in the live chat. And I'm interested now, and I want to kind of go back and Google and see if he's kind of spot on with the manufacturing costs. I know he talked about how much shipping's gone up from China, at least to Australia. He talked about that. But increased cost in manufacturing in China alone, plus the supply constraints in parts, which drives the cost of parts. You have Microsoft, who has the U.S. dollar. The U.S. dollar is worth more than the Chinese yuan, and definitely worth more than the yen. So it's actually cheaper for Microsoft to manufacture consoles right now, the series consoles, than it is for Sony to do. Sony is backed by the Japanese yen. The yen has lost a third of its value to the Chinese yuan. And then even if they exchange from the yen to the U.S. dollar, they're getting, they're not getting as much in the exchange rate there. So they are actually paying more for manufacturing these products than Sony and Nintendo are, which is why that's why Nintendo and Microsoft aren't increasing the price of their consoles. They just don't have to. It's just cheaper for them to manufacture. So,
well, and just to add on to that, some people have said in the chat, and some people have said out on the internet, they keep trying to draw these lines, and we're explaining some of them. But then we get these comparisons. The same sourcing of raw resources, right, applies to Microsoft and applies to Nintendo. Again, each of these companies is different, right? Microsoft is in third place. Do you think that has any impact on the dynamic of the decision that they might make to raise prices or not? It probably should. Xbox is doing Game Pass, right? Xbox is selling a lot of enterprise capacity to game development companies for its cloud-based, cloud-native development environment. Microsoft Gaming is a entire business unit, right? It's built around not solely the consoles, but the subscription, the service, the cloud services that it offers, Xbox All Access, multiple different parts of a business mechanism that are entirely different than the Sony machine. All of this results in different decisions that people are going to make. And again, I go back to, I personally don't accept as logical or rational the attempting to draw ley lines between the three companies and say that, the thing that one has done is unjustified somehow because the other two didn't.
Yeah, and the other two are different positions. And that's, I mean, it goes back to like consumers. Like no three consumers are going to be the same per se.
And Casual Gamer, just here's where we are. Your perspective that a thing is consumer friendly or consumer unfriendly. That's just I don't know what logic or rationale is behind that. Anything that advantages the consumer is consumer friendly. Anything that disadvantages the consumer is consumer unfriendly. I mean, that's a perspective to have. I don't expect companies to be consumer friendly. I expect companies to do the things that they need to do to compete and to reach their financial targets. Whether something's consumer friendly or consumer unfriendly is out of the equation for me. They make choices and decisions about what they're going to do. If you don't like it, the financial and commercial systems and the economic systems, right, have two layers of control. They have the laws of supply and demand, which have governed the interrelationship between suppliers and buyers for hundreds of years, thousands maybe. And then there's government regulation, right, which is in place to keep those companies from doing things that are unethical and immoral. And that's it. Those are the two layers of control. There is not this mythical attempt, right, this thing that doesn't exist, this attempt to institutionalize some additional behavioral arbitration layer in the relationship between companies and suppliers. There is simply a calculation of demand and supply, right, and various other economic factors. And you already therefore have control within the barter system of the free market, right? And that's the demand signal. And if these acts, in your opinion, are consumer unfriendly to you, then as we always say, although people, hate hearing it, then don't buy it, right? Because that's the only thing that people pay attention to, that companies pay attention to.
And that's the thing that kind of like frustrates me about the conversation relates to gaming. It's like, we do this with any other consumer product, and I feel like I'm beating a dead horse now. I've been saying this for like weeks now. Look, if you don't like it, don't buy it. There are other options in the market, hence the free market. I mean, like we do this with every other consumer product. The LG TV, $3,000, too expensive. Guess what? I'm going to get the Vizio that's $1,000.
Right.
No one's shouting. If you don't like the $50
LG,
go ahead.
Right. If you don't like the price increase on the PlayStation, then do what you clearly want to do because you're defending the stance of Microsoft and Nintendo. Buy a Nintendo Switch, buy a Microsoft Xbox, buy a Series X. That is exactly what you were supposed to do in these times. So I don't really understand the need to feel like, that there's a justification or whatever behind, what companies do.
Yeah, I agree with Capono. Don't buy a Vizio TV. You'll regret it. Yeah, Capono, I actually bought a Vizio. I do kind of regret it. Tactical Gamer, the $20 super chat goes, I can see where Sony's coming from. When we at CISA conduct assist visits and vulnerability assessments, C-levels hesitate to spend money due to increased costs of shipping goods and critical infrastructure maintenance and protection. Thank you for that $20 super chat, Tactical Gamer. But again, when we say these things, again, I gotta say this, Game Logic, and it's crazy I have to say it. We're not defending Sony and saying they are all righteous. No one's saying that here. We're just pointing out why these things are happening. Hopefully, you can get some more insight, perspective into how these companies arrive to these decisions, because it's more than just record. It's more than just record profits, or Nintendo, Microsoft didn't do it, so they shouldn't do it. It's a lot deeper than I think most people realize. But go ahead, Game Logic.
And BRAP, I'm gonna go one step further, right?
Okay.
I'm gonna say that it is right for them to increase prices, right? If I put product,
you are going to be villainized now. By the way,
I don't care. We get vilified anyway, right?
Yeah,
if I have a product that's in high demand on the market, and I believe that I can charge a greater price for it and maintain demand above the threshold of my current supply, then it is an absolutely acceptable, right, company step to take to raise prices. And I'm absolutely certain that there are investors that ask why they're not, right? Again, we attempt to ascribe morality and ethicality and friendliness and happiness to these decisions that are being made, and they are not. They are not things where emotions are tied around them. They are not things where somebody, quite frankly, gives a crap about whether you like them or not. That is absolutely not part of the equation. Somebody was putting in chat that like customer sentiment, right, does play into corporate decisions. Again, only in as much as it impacts demand in relation to supply.
As in, if PlayStation 5s are sitting on the shelf,
Right.
you're gonna see a reduction in price.
So Capona says that's exploiting customers. Capona, no, it's not. Exploitation of customers comes when there's something that a customer has to buy that they have no other options for. That is a lower level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and raising prices on that. Exploitation of customers is the guy who hoarded all the toilet paper, right, and was selling them out of his garage for incredibly high prices, right? Exploiting customers.
Or masks. Remember masks? That was another big one. People were were purposely hoarding those things. By the way, there was raids, law enforcement raids, on people that were they were buying like hand sanitizer, face masks, things like that, and like marking them up 1,000%, whatever case. So literally, like their homes were raided because they were literally gouging people and taking away those things from those items from like doctors, medical professionals, things like that. So, but go ahead, man. I'm sorry, man. I just want.
Yeah, it is not exploiting customers when you talk about a luxury product. Again, anybody who has an iPhone in their pocket has no room whatsoever to talk about a company exploiting customers. The margins on Apple products are incredibly high in comparison to other segments in other sectors of the electronics industry. Again, the term exploiting customers seems to me to be tightly coupled and absolutely necessarily hinged upon the concept of entitlement, right? And I don't use that as a negative term, right? People are entitled to having their basic needs met. And so in, I guess, certain parts of the world, I won't necessarily say all, right? Toilet paper is an essential need, right? Gasoline is an essential need. Food, water are essential needs. And so taking advantage of customers in market segments like that, where they don't have other options and where those things are necessary, right? In terms of security, in terms of having their basic needs met, those are actions that you take to exploit customers, right? But it is in no way exploitative to utilize those methodologies in accordance with supply and demand for luxury products.
Yeah, no, it's, again, man, I mean, unfortunately, like you saying this is going to lead to us being villainized more, which is fine. Game logic. I think I'm used to it at this point, but no, I mean, all jokes aside, I mean, like it's, what you're saying is spot on. I think the term anti-consumer, consumer exploitation gets tossed around like a happy hooker a lot, and unfortunately, people are using it in the wrong context. I don't think this is consumer exploitation because we have choices. Like, if you don't like the if you don't like the PlayStation 5 increase, which is, you have every right as a consumer to say this isn't for me, you have other options in the marketplace. You can either go and buy a Nintendo Switch, or you can go and buy an Xbox Series S, which is a $300 entry point to next level or next gen gaming. I mean, you can do those things. Like you have choices as a consumer. You don't have to buy what PlayStation is offering. That's perfectly fine. Again, we do this with all other consumer products. Not everyone's going to go out and buy a $2,500 LG TV. Guess what? There's options in the marketplace. Not everyone's going to go out and buy a BMW X7. You have a Honda Pilot, so again, I mean, it's, I can see Yojimbo 678. It's exploitation. WTF? Ha ha ha. Thank you for that insightful commentary, Yojimbo. Yeah, I appreciate that. A lot of thought process behind that. So.
Yeah, and Sergeant brings up the point, right? I was talking about the scalpers, and so even then, right? To me, charging an exorbitant price for a product, to me, isn't natively exploitative in and of itself. The combination of doing that with the application of technology of utilizing bots, right, to buy up all of the supply and hoarding all of that supply and then charging higher prices, I look at as being exploitive, right?
Yeah. And those are also things of necessity too. Toilet paper, that's a necessity.
Right,
Yeah.
and Ryan brings up you could buy a PS4 Pro, although people are still selling that at a price. No crap, right? Like, I mean, I went, was it a few months ago? I actually gave some thought to going back and like trying to procure a Nintendo 3DS. Right, people are selling those for high prices on eBay, right? It just like Ryan says, PS4 Pro as well. Electronics are in extremely scarce supply, and you know, and so prices for that supply on various markets, right, through various supply lines are increasing appropriately.
Yeah, you know, and Yojimbo's funny. Like he's saying, like, you know, it's exploitation. I'm like, dude, like, are you not participating in the market? Like, is AMC raising the price of movie tickets, exploiting their consumers?
Yeah, and this is one of my problems, Jimbo, and this is what I say about people dropping points. Like, your perspective on what consumer exploitation is a perspective. It's not ubiquitous. It's not universal. It's not like the world isn't defined by how you see it. So the fact that we have a different perspective is why we have these conversations, and you clearly don't want to participate. So I mean, I don't know why you're bothering to continue dropping comments in the chat.
Well, again, and to my point, it's like, you know, there's other I guarantee you, Jimbo is actively engaged in other consumer products where those prices have gone up, and happily engaging. I'm sure he is. I'm willing to bet $1 million he is. And that's where my frustration lies with this conversation. It's like people are complaining about things that they're actively engaged in with other consumer products. But that goes back to my point. Like, again, if you don't want to buy it, you don't see value in it, don't get it. Like, I don't begrudge anyone not wanting to spend more money for a consumer product. That's fine. There's consumer products that have gone up in price that I won't buy. You know, when I bought my LG TV, my OLED, when it came out for, you know, I think the C1, I don't know, I think it retailed for like $2,800. I got a 65-inch C1. I think when it released, it was like $2,800, and I'm like, you know what? I'm not paying $2,800 for it. I'm just not doing it. Like, that's just not worth it to me.
Right. I guess we're still gonna have this conversation. Hey, Jimbo, it's not your perspective that I don't like. It's your demeanor, right? It's your lack of mutual respect for another human being having a conversation about, right, the industry of gaming, which we all love. It's quite frankly, it's you coming into the chat and acting like a dick. If that's going to be your approach, then no, I don't want to converse with you. I don't mind that you have a different opinion. Lots of people can have different opinions. You don't have to be a jerk to convey that. So there we go.
All right. So what I was saying was, back to my C1. You know, I didn't feel like at that time I wanted to spend $2,800 on a C1. There were other people in the marketplace, people on Twitter, that were so happy. They were they wanted to go out. They wanted to get that new C1, but I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. I didn't see value in spending $2,800 on a TV. When it went on sale for $2,200, I was like, yes, I'm going to buy it. And that's my point. Like, you know, we all assign value to consumer products differently. And this idea that, you know, that, not an idea, but the fact that it just seems that people forget that the way we consume things isn't any different to video games, that it doesn't apply to video games, that, you know, inflation and I'm going to throw macroeconomics, as people hate when I say that word now, apparently, like those things don't apply to the gaming industry. They absolutely do. They absolutely do. And companies in gaming are, you know, for-profit companies or publicly traded companies, and I feel like we understand this dynamic with other industries that we consume products from. We understand the relationship there, but it almost seems like gaming, it just goes out the window. And I don't know if it's thrown out the window for the purpose of driving narratives, but it's maddening. It's like, people, like, what the fuck are we doing here?
Right. So El Ricardo in chat says, BRAP, the problem is you guys trying to defend the price of the PS5 for the last 6 days.
I haven't defended that.
Yeah. So I'll go back, El Ricardo. I guess, you know, my personal view is I'm not trying to defend it because I don't care. Right. Again, defense seems to me to be a thing associated with emotion. Right. Again, these companies make financial decisions based on the laws of supply and demand. right? And their interaction with consumers in a free market, right? I don't need to defend it because it just is, right? And again, the choice people can make is to buy it or not buy it. This whole narrative of it's anti-consumer, ascribing all of these kind of humanizing characteristics to the organism that is a corporation, to me, just are invalid, right? In my perspective, right? I don't personally think of things that way. Corporations are an organizational entity driven mostly by the achievement to achieve financial objectives, just like every company that I have worked for. I would contend just like the companies that most people work for, right? And in most companies, there's an objective to achieve profit, to steadily increase that profit, and then to allow people to share in the company's success. When the companies that I've worked for have done better, I have been paid more. I like to get paid more steadily every year, right? And so I like working for companies that have an aggressive objective of increasing market share, being competitive, so that I envision that I can benefit from it. I don't really know anyone who's motivated to go work for a C-level mid-pack company. At least not people who I would argue are high performers. And so my expectation is that other companies also behave in similar manner. So this notion that it's defending, it's not necessarily defending the corporation. Maybe if anything, it's defense against the people who are making up a bunch of crap without actually looking anything up, and based on misinformation, disinformation, a lack of an understanding of finance and technology, in an effort to join in a conversation about things that don't really impact them and don't really gate how they themselves behave, right? Yeah. Again, a lot of this is dust kicked up by a lot of YouTubers trying to drive traffic to their channels and followers on Twitter who don't live in the countries where the price increases are happening, right? They actually live in the United States where actually they are benefiting from the strength of the US dollar, right? Because they aren't suffering these price increases.
Yeah,
so,
and that's yeah.
So if I'm defending anything, I'm defending against the hypocrisy of a lot of the ideas that are being laid out there.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, it's not defending the corporations as much as it is addressing some of the, like you said, misinformation, disinformation. And maybe I haven't been clear about that with the show, but that's why we had David Faulkner on last weekend, because he's a financial analyst. Like, he reads companies' financials. He understands what they mean. He understands how companies make decisions. And that's kind of been the only point in these conversations. Look, it's people pull out the jump to conclusions, Matt. They're like, well, Sony's the most profitable ever. It's unjustified for them to raise prices. And the only thing I'm saying is, well, how do you know that? Like, where's that coming from? Like, what people are playing. I hate to say this. We saw this on BRAP when we had Deli on. The issue in what drives me bonkers is that you have people who argue subject matter experts, and these people have no expertise, and they will argue these subject matter experts on things that happened here. Somebody was debating Deli, who worked on what was it? Watch Dogs. What was the game he worked on? Watchdog Legions. Is that what it was? That?
Yeah,
I forget.
I think so.
Yeah. And a guy to live chat was debating him about the development of the game that he worked on. Like, what's happening? Like, why? Really? And the same thing's happening here. Like, people are making these, are coming to these wild conclusions without actually doing the research and figure out, well, why is this happening? How's inflation impacting economies? How's the exchange rate impacting economies? People are saying, oh, well, Nintendo didn't do it, so therefore, Sony's bad for doing it. Well, do you know why Nintendo's not doing it? Like I've seen that Nintendo comparison thrown around so many times, but no one's ever said, hey, Nintendo didn't do it, but here's why they're not doing it. No one's laid out that argument.
Right. It's a lot of arguments that are being made with incomplete information, right? To make the claim that Sony was somehow unjust while Microsoft and Nintendo are somehow just, I would have to see all of the financial information about the cost of each of the products that they're manufacturing, right? The sales of each of the products that they're manufacturing, right? And be able to lay them down side by side. But people aren't doing that. People say that, Nintendo's profitable, Microsoft's profitable, Sony's profitable. At no point are those people laying down their earnings statements, right, and their balance sheets side by side and running those comparisons. I know because I can tell from the things that they say right on podcasts that they're not pulling the earnings statements, right, which is a thing that I actively go look for when the earnings reports come out. I don't simply, read the article that came out from, Windows Central or Polygon about the earnings statement, nor do I stop at just pulling the PowerPoint brief, right, that is spoken to, and that's typically released, a week or so before the earnings statement. I actually go to look at the balance sheet. And so, if I'm doing that, but they aren't, then I don't understand how they're jumping to conclusions that they clearly haven't done the due diligence to prove or disprove. So it's just kind of a strange approach to me. And this is where I go to, right? There's a lot of politicking on Twitter using very common kind of grassroots campaign efforts, such as lathering a lot of people up who may actually be impacted by this, right? Who may actually not be able to afford a $550, 650 Australian dollar console in those countries. But there are people sitting here who are not impacted by that, but they are attempting to, to kind of conflagrate the discussion, right, and give it a lot more heat, based on making some of these wild extrapolations.
Yeah, like you Jimbo, I gotta bust your balls here, buddy. When you say it's so bad, even Japan is turning on Sony. Japan. So Japan, are you implying the entire country of Japan or the entire market of Japan is turning on Sony? When I ask you how you're arriving to this conclusion, you're saying Twitter.
Oh, I can guarantee you where he got that from. He got that from the Push Square article that quoted one tweet that had 216 responses. So that's 217 gamers, ostensibly. I'll give you the benefit of the doubt that everyone in that thread was an active participant in the market commerce of Japan. That's 217 people out of the 75 million gamers on the Japanese market. So because Push Square drew those wild extrapolations and said, Japanese gamers aren't happy with Sony. Many of them are thinking about converting to PC, yada, yada, yada. Again, this is a journalist trying to drive traffic to their site over a news article, making a fairly wild extrapolation off of one tweet, right, and the responses to that. When I statistically look at the actual impact of that, it is a insignificant population sample, and wouldn't allow a 10th grader to pass their math class if given that problem. But please, by all means, go right ahead and follow up on that logic and rationale in your consideration of it being valid and credible.
Yeah, I've seen that argument made by Twitter. I'm like, really? Like, you're using a very small like population sample to extrapolate that? Like, come on, like what? Yeah. Like, what are we doing here? Like, I don't get it. It's
small SMOLL.
Yeah, I mean, oh no, I didn't see it, but no, that's not all. And BRAP, if you're going to quote me, read the full thing, please. Okay, you want to? Okay, Twitter, LOL, kidding. Do some research. I'm not the secretary here. That's what you said. When I asked you specifically how you're quantifying that Japan is turning on Sony, you responded with Twitter. Oh, you said only kidding. I mean, okay, I'll give you that. You said you were only kidding. Jesus. Okay. But people are saying that, by the way. I don't know if he's only kidding, though. I don't know if I believe that. But I did see people saying that, though, because actually someone said that to me on Twitter. I'm like, okay.
Right.
See, now I gotta stop. I gotta stop paying attention to the chat. Where was I now? Yeah. So again, like, this isn't like defense for Sony. This is just really just pointing out, like, trying to explain the phenomena, if you will, of why these things happen. And look, I guess I guess what's puzzling to me, like Game Logic, I don't put this much emotion and thought in gaming. I don't push this much emotional thought into any other consumer product I'm engaged in, or what company's doing something that's pro consumer. What I look at is, do I find value in this product? Is it within my budgetary means? And that's it. That's all I think about. Like I don't like I don't understand the emotion that I'm seeing about this particular industry over a company increasing the price of a console. I think it's fair to say, if you were to say, hey, you know what, as a consumer, I'm not buying it at $50. That's fine. But the other stuff that I'm seeing is trivial to me. I don't understand it because I feel like we don't do this with any other consumer product. Like I definitely don't do this with any other consumer product. I definitely don't do this with gaming. I never look at, like, when I look at Microsoft, I never thinking, when I walk into Best Buy, I'm never like, well, you know what? Geez, Xbox really is pro consumer. I don't think about that. I look at the Xbox and I'm like, is this what I want? Does it have the kind of games that I want? Am I going to enjoy playing this?
Yeah, it things have to be very out on extremities for me to invoke any concerns of, again, ethicality and morality into what consumer electronic prices I want to buy. Like, what I don't understand, like, if we're going to do that, then, like, why aren't we concerned about whether or not electronic companies are exploiting laborers in China? Why aren't we concerned about their working conditions? Why aren't we concerned about the amount of digital waste that we deploy to all these countries when we export, our digital waste that we can't recycle? There's just a lot of other avenues that we could go down, and lots of people would say, well, that's a whataboutism. But again, that's exactly where this argument starts, right? This argument starts with the whataboutism of morality and ethicality, and this conflation of additional topics into what has always been and really is nothing more than, again, the supplier and demand relationship.
I mean, I didn't see, like, people, like, levying the same energy at NVIDIA with their GPUs. You know, when they were in short demand, and then NVIDIA's like releases a 3090 Ti using this, what was it, the 3090? Was it the 3090 Ti that they came out with?
Yeah, well, I mean,
they could have used it. I guess they could have used the same parts, I guess, to make more 3080s or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, NVIDIA released those at MSRP, and then, right, the flow down merchants, right, increased the price on them, and in many cases they were trying to still sell them at MSRP. They were just in incredibly short demand. Capono says, I find value in my iPhone. Capono, I absolutely agree with you, right? One of my instances is, again, the cell phone market, right? So flagship phones used to cost $500, right? $500 to $600. That is the price band for mid-level phones now.
Those are the good old days, by the way.
Right. Flagship phones are now $1,000, anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000, right? And I haven't heard this volume of outcry. People make choices about those, and I'm with you, Capono, in that, again, if somebody doesn't find value in the PlayStation 5, then they shouldn't buy it, whether it gets a $50 increase or not. I go back to this discussion of, and I know people hate to bring it up, I go back to the discussion of $70 games versus $60 games and all the mental gymnastics we do with $70 games. But if you had a justification model and rationale for making the decision to pay $60 for a game, and the new model that you're creating out of nowhere for the $70, like, I would have respect for that comparison. But I was fine paying $60 for games, right, based on nothing, right, based on simply the fact that it was the baseline, right, at the time you started consuming. But now I'm not satisfied paying $70 for a game because of all of these wild figures that I'm making up. That I just don't understand. Right. So same thing for the PlayStation, right? if the price increase in another country that you don't have to pay somehow makes a difference to you in your view of Sony, then if you're still in the market for a PlayStation 5, and again, lots of these people making these issues up aren't in the market for a PlayStation 5 because they already have one, then, again, I could understand, being angry or getting out of the market, but otherwise I just really don't.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I mean, it's, yeah, I just, again, I don't know, man. I'm just scratching my head right now. Like I don't understand how, anyone thinks that like explaining how this stuff works is celebrating price increases. Like that's not, no one has said, yes, good job, Sony, pat on the back for raising prices. All we're doing is discussing what happens kind of behind the scenes, what leads to these decisions, how the impact of inflation, currency exchange rates has impacted manufacturing in China for some of these countries, how Microsoft's, and again, addressing specifically Microsoft and Nintendo, we're talking about them and why they haven't increased their prices, because those are things that people have brought up. And people have brought up Microsoft and Nintendo without actually understanding why neither one of those companies has actually increased prices. They basically have come out and said, look, those are the good guys. They didn't release prices or increase prices. And all I've said is, well, no, they didn't increase prices because of this.
Yeah, and Capone's saying in chat, they want to hear why you don't support it, BRAP. And I'll jump in first before you. Again, I don't. It's not. My vocalizing whether or not I support it or not means absolutely nothing. The only thing that matters is whether or not you go buy it or not. My optic on it is I already have a PlayStation 5. I'm in a country that isn't impacted by the price increase. It kind of sucks for people who wanted it to buy it in the other markets who now can't. But I also recognize that people who do want to buy it, again, a product that's in very scarce supply with a huge demand. But I also acknowledge that there are people who want to buy it, who can afford to pay that higher price, who now have fewer buyers to compete with in their effort to get one. And so maybe at best I look at it as an over under, but that's just, again, that's a factual perspective. I don't feel anything about it or not. Prices are prices. I naturally expect prices to go up over time, right? Kind of sort of believing in anything else is kind of a flat earther perspective to have on things, right? When game prices went up to, I started buying games at $40. I saw them go up to $50. I saw them go up to $60. And the only thing I felt about it, in air quotes, was, damn, I wonder when they're going to go up to 70, because I kind of think that that's inevitable, right? So if you choose to believe that somehow prices are going to stay flat and never increase over time, I guess that's a perspective to have. If you look at things like these types of things that happen or things that are not going to happen, that's a perspective to have. I expect that they are. And the only thing that I'm going to decide when they do is whether I'm going to buy it or not. This notion of grabbing, torches and pitchforks and storming the Bastille when these things happen is a thing that's kind of strange to me. But I'll let you go ahead and respond to that.
No, that's very trivial to me too. I mean, like, what was Capone's question to me again? I forgot, man.
I think he said, why? I gotta go back and look at it. I think he said they want to hear why you don't support it. Yeah, they want to hear why you don't support it, BRAP. Not just that you don't, but why.
Why I don't support price increases?
Yeah.
I mean, because look, I never want to look, man. Look, let me tell you something. I don't ever want to pay more for anything. What consumer does? I don't want to, but I understand how this works. I understand the fact that I have no expectation that I don't live in a world where I'm like, prices are never going to go up. Like, why would I think that ever? Because everything I've ever actually participated in, and again, this isn't me championing price increases and saying it's okay, but I understand if something's not okay for me, all right? And again, I'm not, as a consumer, if I can get a deal, I'm going to get a deal. I don't want to pay, if the price of the thing goes up, I'm not out there. I'm not out there championing for prices to go up. I don't think anyone here on this panel is doing that. Game Logic, I'm certainly know you're not championing for prices to go up. I know you're not thinking, God, I can't wait for Nvidia to raise those prices. Like no consumer thinks like. No,
but this is me saying saying that the sky is blue. For frack's sake, it's blue, right? Yeah. If I don't like that, I'm not defending the fact that the sky is blue. I'm not saying that it's right, but it's blue. If I don't like the sky, then I don't have to go outside. And yeah, maybe that sucks, but that's an inevitability if that's the way that I choose to view the world, right? Capona says, then our pay should increase. Now, one of the things that I'm going to start writing more and more about, right, is the fact that, look, if you are a non-exempt employee and if you are earning an hourly wage and you have a problem with the corporate view of the world and you feel like your pay is not increasing commensurate with the success of whatever company you work for, then okay. Then that's a set of optics that you have on the world, right? And again, regardless, right, I still don't say that anybody's view of the world is wrong. I just say that it's not the way that I look at it, and it's not a way that I understand, right? And if somebody wants to explain it to me, they can. But, you know, when Capona says, then our pay should increase, yeah, Capono, I don't disagree with you. If I accept prices gradually increasing over time as an inevitability, what it drives me to do, what it has driven me to do, what it will always drive me to do is make sure that I do the things at work to make sure that my pay steadily increases, right? Over the last 9 years, I have doubled my salary, right? I haven't done that because I've casually gone to work and shrugged my shoulders and assumed that prices were going to stay flat, right? I have goals and objectives that I'm trying to achieve, right? Retirement, kids, home, whatever, right? And oh boy, along the way, right, a certain acquisition of a certain number of electronics that I enjoy participating in. So yeah, I have daily goals, right, in my work life that are oriented around making sure that my pay increases, right? And not just casually increases, right? That I get more salary increases than most of my peers, right? That I get bonuses, right? More than most of my peers, right? And sometimes I don't make those objectives. Sometimes I'm not as good. Sometimes I go and I work and I play for, you know, I don't know what, the Kansas City Chiefs. Sometimes I'm playing for the Cleveland Browns, right? And so, you know, my pay will vary depending on whether or not I'm a starting player, right, on those teams, depending on the talent that's on those teams, depending on what my value is to the company, right, that I participate in. And so again, I talk about, you know, these things are a certain inevitability. They drive me to take actions to accommodate that, not to make a claim that there are things that I'm entitled to, that it's unjust for companies to take the actions that they take.
Yeah, that's a great point, man. That's a great point. But, you know, to your question, Capone, like I as a consumer, I don't want to pay for more things or pay more. I'm not advocating or rooting for pay increases because the more money I can keep to myself, the better for me. It benefits me, benefits my family to do that. But I also understand I'm not under any, you know, I don't think, I naively think that things are never going to go up. I understand that prices go up. Throughout my life, throughout the 40 years I've been playing video games, the price of games have gone up. So when the $70 price increase happened, I wasn't surprised because I've lived through the $40, $50, $60, $70 increases. And again, they're going to go up again. I don't want them to go up, but they're going to. And then when they go up, I have a decision to make as an adult. Do I partake in video games still? Maybe I do, maybe I don't. Maybe I don't buy AAA games anymore. I'll have to make that decision when I get there or when that happens. But that's just my perception of it. Like I don't again, no one's pom-pomming companies to increase prices, but I understand that this is what companies do. But I also understand, and this is the part that really kind of ruffles my feathers a little bit, Game Logic, that everyone is so hyper-focused on what these companies are doing, but they're never hyper-focused on what they're doing as a consumer. And that the consumers have choices. That if you don't If you don't want to participate, you don't have to. No one's forcing you to. No one's twisting your arm. Just don't buy it. Wait for it to go on sale. You could still enjoy $70 games. You don't have to pay $70 at launch. You could wait. Within a week or two, that game will probably be discounted. Unless it's Nintendo.
Right, or even more so, right? And this goes back to that argument, right? The people who are saying scream louder that games shouldn't be $70, right? The thing that I don't agree with and I don't understand is I feel like those people shouldn't be screaming that, right? What those people should be screaming is go play these indie games, go play the games that aren't charging $70. Heck, go buy games from Microsoft if they're maintaining the $60 price point, right? Take action that actually changes the demand signal that's being set on the market rather than screaming about the things that you can't do. And the same thing here when we talk about, if you're really angry about prices going up in other countries that don't impact you, but you're still angry about it, that's fine. Go buy an Xbox, go buy a Nintendo Switch. Go buy Switch Lights for your kids. Go buy what is the Xbox Series S? Has come down on price in some places, but I don't know if that's retailer reduction in prices or if that's an actual drop in official MSRP for Microsoft. I don't think it's an official price drop in MSRP for Microsoft. But regardless, right? Go spend $270, $280, right, on an Xbox Series S. Go send a different demand signal. Again, go back to BRAP. These are the other options that are available. Go buy a Nintendo. Go buy an NVIDIA Shield, right, and participate in GeForce Now. I don't. I guess it's just my thing of not understanding. There was a time I couldn't afford to go to the opera, right, or eat at Ruth's Chris, right, but I didn't scream from the rooftops that Ruth's Chris was immoral, right, and unethical for charging as much as they did for a steak, or screaming about how much prices were to the opera.
I've been at Ruth's Chris in a long time, man. I was back. I used to be a Morton's guy, so we go back between Morton's and Ruth's Chris. But I'm sorry, go ahead, man.
No, that's it. And again, it's not a. People get angry about drawing the analogies to other markets, right? It's not so much drawing the analogy, it is drawing an analogy, but talking about, right, the way to actualize on your concerns about the gaming industry and taking the steps to, again, send the demand signal. Because while we have a lofty view of how companies respond to Twitter, I don't believe that's the case. I think we way overestimate our impact and influence on the gaming industry because they consistently do things that Twitter rails against, and I'm like, yeah, they're doing that because of how the market responds.
Yeah, I mean, like the market responded to $70 games in support of. The market wants more AAA games. They want the best, latest graphics. They want these, movie-like experiences. That stuff costs money, and again, I mean, look, I'm not advocating for price increases, but they're going to happen because the market demands it. Those things don't come come cheaply to make. I mean, and again, when we explain labor cost and cost of making games and the increase and how expensive it is to make games now, that's not to excuse price increases, only to give people insight to why these things are happening, and that's all. Because I've had that too, by the way, Game Logic. People are like, oh, you're advocating $70 games. I'm like, no. What I'm telling you is when you say that they're not justified, I'm explaining to you why they're happening. This is why they're happening. You don't have to agree with it. But you also don't have to buy it. And that's the thing. Like, we have so many different options, Game Logic. When we grew up gaming, we didn't have free to play games.
Yeah, so the geeky nerd, right, says, can't wait for y'all to defend PSVR 2 costing more than a console. So again, I go back to a company sets a price for a product based on the demand they expect for that product. But you apparently interpret that as defending a PSVR, defending something. So explain to me, articulate for me what you would interpret as attacking a company for that. And please explain to me why you feel a company should be attacked for whatever price they set for a product. Because I don't understand the interpretation that if I say demand for a product is higher than supply, therefore the price for the product gets set, I don't understand how you interpret that as defending. Are you saying that I'm I'm defending a company behaving in accordance with the laws of supply and demand. And if that is how you interpret it, so are you telling me that the way you see the world, companies, corporations should ignore the economic laws of supply and demand and set their prices based on whatever they think is friendly to consumers?
I'd be interested to hear his feedback. And crickets.
Yeah, I mean, and the way that I am not accepting of whatever price they set for the PSVR 2 is I'm not buying a PSVR 2 just the same way that I didn't buy a PSVR.
Yeah, if I think the PSVR is too much money, if it launches look, I can say right now, if it launches at $500, probably not getting it. Probably not gonna get it. You know, so I think, you know, and again, but those are again, these are things that we do on a daily basis as consumers. We assign value to things and what we're willing to pay for products. I mean, like, what's that guy's name? The Geeky Nerd? I mean,
yeah. So
does he say those things when LG releases a new OLED? You know, like, I don't understand. Like,
right. So, Dr. Shannon Curry, and I've seen that you've been on this bend for a while now. Why wouldn't we criticize a company for raising products? My personal feeling about why I don't criticize a company for raising products is because it doesn't do anything and it's a waste of my time. That's why. Because to criticize them for it, I would have to have a lot more information than other people feel that they have to have. Because I don't believe in criticizing people without any justification or rationale just because. Now, there are a lot of people with the opinion I think that you have, which is that, which is a binary, right? Prices go up, therefore I criticize. And that's a great way to view the world. It's rather, in my opinion, unsophisticated. That's just not the way that I think about things. But you know, everybody should do you, right?
Did you just say unsophisticated?
I mean, it is.
That's a nice
right?
word. Never mind.
I mean, it doesn't invoke.
I don't disagree with you. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't invoke any complexity right into the thought process. It just says prices go up, so I'm going to get angry. So, I mean, that's a great way to go about it. I guess it's rather efficient. I just personally look at life as it's more efficient for me to not be bothered rather than to rage about it. So Shannon Curry says, me as a consumer am looking out for my own interests, not a corporation's. Again, that optic is depending on what you want from the market. I don't like to stand in lines. And so if prices go up on something and it means that for a scarce product, I'm not standing in line in a queue with somebody who, quite frankly, let's just say it makes less money than I do, then that's not necessarily a net bad. It all depends on what the supply is on the market and what the demand is. So again, I go back to, it's not a binary for me. A binary is a rather unsophisticated way of looking at it. If you don't mind standing in a line, right, for interest, for example, I spent this afternoon at an amusement park. That is something that normally I don't like spending my money on doing because I don't get a lot of value out of spending a ton of money to go stand around in a line. Quite frankly, with people who, right, may not make as much money as I do. Why would I go stand in a line, right, to access a product that is in large supply, right? Today, there wasn't a lot of people and there wasn't a big line. I enjoyed myself, right? But again, that's the difference in the dynamic of a market, right? And responding to the market based on the forces that are at play, not just because.
Well, and that's what I said earlier. Like, you know, I used to pay for bottle service. And, you know, bottle service at the time, and it was, you know, $1,000 for a table. And I did that because I didn't want to wait in line at a bar to get a drink. So I'd pay the $1,000 front for 3 bottles of whatever it was. And, you know, I have a waitress or waiter, and they would come, and I didn't have to wait for anything. I didn't want to deal with that. It sounds crazy. I know a lot of people are like, well, why would you pay $1,000 to sit and drink? Because it was convenient for me to do so, and I had the financial resources to do it, and that's why I did it. You know, I would go to Washington Commanders games, and I would sit at the club level, or I would get a suite. Why? Because I didn't want to pay for the food, or the food was included. There was value for me in that. People would bring me my food, my drinks. I didn't have to go stand in line. Like
right. And Sticks of Truth took the bait, right? As I knew someone would. He just said he doesn't want to stand beside people he deems poor. Again, the notion of poor for me is a quantification. It's not an emotion. I would simply establish it as whatever the designation of the poverty line is, right, in a given country based on the socioeconomic standard and median for the average citizen, right? So quite frankly, I don't know whether or not those people are poor or not. That's not up for me to decide, right? What I'm saying is that obviously there are people on a market that are less advantaged than you are, right? And what I'm saying is I don't like standing in line, competing with other buyers for things that other buyers can afford, right? That is part of the law of supply and demand and the way people react, right? Do I pay more for my groceries? Yes, because I order them from Instacart, because I don't want to be bothered with taking the time to go to the grocery store when I have other stuff to do. Because my hours are billable. It's actually a better use of my time financially to sit at my desk and continue working, right, than to go out of my way offline and go spend time buying groceries, right? This is the Michael Jordan argument, right, of economics, if you've ever sat in a graduate level economics class, right? So one of the examples is, does it make sense for Michael Jordan to mow his own lawn, right, rather than go to, Chicago Bulls arena or whatever and work on free throws? Now, this is not an effort to compare myself to Michael Jordan, right? But it's an example that's talked about just to kind of highlight the acuteness of the issue, right? There are things that you make from an economic and financial standpoint where at a certain point things aren't worth your time. And again, this feeds into the amount of effort that you expend going after products that are in scarcity, right? And that can cut both ways. Sometimes it means that you have a job that allows you the flexible hours to go off and chase after a product, right, that's in scarcity, right? One of the ways that I was able to obtain consoles at the beginning of the generation, right, was because I have a job that allowed me to work entirely remote. And so when those consoles dropped, I wasn't sitting in an office, right? I was actually somewhere where I could be on a meeting and have apps up on my phone to obtain those consoles, right? Other people were in a socioeconomic status, right, in the service industry, right, and in other places where they were still required to physically go to work, right? So they weren't able to obtain those consoles. That's a difference in socioeconomic status. Again, all I'm saying is those types of things have an impact on the market and have an impact on your perspective in the optic that you have when things like prices increase. Sometimes it impacts you, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it impacts you positively, sometimes it doesn't. BRAP's being really nice, saying he doesn't like paying higher prices. I would contend that there are certain tactical situations, right, in the law of supply and demand where an increase in price is actually beneficial for a certain demographic of consumer, right? That's a fact, right? And so while we make this argument, because it sounds great and it feeds a really awesome narrative that, don't celebrate increases in prices, the fact of the matter is that when you're talking about luxury products, when it reduces the other buyer competitiveness with the volume of buyer competitiveness on the market, that is sometimes beneficial for a consumer, right? And if you don't want to accept that, then you don't want to accept it. That's fine. That's your perspective. But I don't think that that's the case. And I definitely don't think that that's the case in terms of how it influences the behavior of certain demographics of the market segments, right, in the industries that we're talking about.
Yeah, well, that's why I brought up the example of bottle service. And it's interesting too because people have talked about like the $30, $50 increases, and I've really heard it from one perspective. It's going to price people out, but there's going to be people there that are going to pay the $30, $50 because they want it and because they can afford the $30, $50, and because the $30 to $50 for them isn't really an increase for them at that point. And I've done this. I'm like, hey, if I'm $500 into the game already, what's another $30 for me at that point? I'm already $500 in. And I've rationalized things like that before.
Right. And I mean, we should know, most people should understand. And again, these are topics that we're not presenting rocket science, right? The rules of price sensitivity, right? Within a certain band, within certain thresholds, people are insensitive, right, to variations in price, and some people are. And so again, depending on how much money you make, what your socioeconomic status is. Look, a person who is married and has kids and owns a home is going to be more price sensitive, right, to certain variations in price, even though they maybe make more money, right, than a person who's single. Again, it's not a binary, right? It depends on thresholds. It depends on metrics. It depends on ratios. But the person who is less price sensitive for whatever reason, right, can accommodate the fluctuations in price, can accommodate the increases. So Albert says this guy is full of himself, and that's fine. That's a perspective to have. Again, right, what I'm voicing is, right, how your behavior actualizes on the topics that I just brought up, right? The fact that there are certain demographics that aren't sensitive to fluctuations in price. If you feel like that's full of myself, then that's your optic and that's your perspective.
Yeah, no. I'm sorry, I'm just reading the live chat here. No, Brian Lynn's like, does anyone else want to go to a club with BRAP? Yeah, so yeah, I don't know. Look, again, I mean, the point of the show, again, I kind of want to circle back, is not to, we aren't here again to pom-pom price increases or anything like that. Just trying to give people a perspective into why these things happen, the impact that, because people have brought up questions like, again, why Microsoft's not doing this, why Nintendo's not doing this. Kind of give some insight to the whys, because I've seen a lot of assumptions being made, and then people taking those assumptions and kind of running with it as it's actually true. And so again, just trying to put some perspective on that, and maybe kill some of the misinformation that's out there. So that's all. Again. So look, it's actually 12:20 here on the East Coast. BRAP King Thrash says I would pay $600 for PlayStation 5 over Xbox. Thank you for that, King Thrash. Something I don't think you would, but anyhow, maybe you would.
Didn't Kaz say you just get a second job?
Yeah, Kaz did say that actually. Yeah. So that I thought was actually worse than this increase. Him saying that, but that's another conversation. All right. First of all, I want to thank everyone in the live chat for hanging out with us tonight, especially this late. It's 12:21 here at the East Coast, so thank you everyone for watching. Really appreciate it. We'll be back live Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern time. I know, Game Logic, as much as I enjoy this conversation, I already know what the feedback's going to be on this. It's going to be
let them eat cake.
Yeah.
Look, I guess I think my perspective is a lot of people who have these pre-canned narratives and these binary views of the world will argue that they're popular because they're saying the things that are unpopular. But in my perspective, they're saying the things that are incredibly simplistic, and are essentially worthless because they're not actually based on any fact or any, analysis of the market or any consideration of different, consumer demographics and yada, yada, yada. My personal feeling is, and I get it, people are going to get angry. But I guess my feeling is, people are getting angry in response to, right, hearing facts, right? And hearing like a dialogue about the way the world works. And hearing a dialogue that is oriented around not sticking your head in the sand and acting as if there are things that don't exist. And again, if you want to hear that information and make other choices, that's absolutely fine, right? The point is that we're presenting a perspective that may not be the one that you typically hear, not because we're contriving it to be so, but because we're relaying information that's not oriented around inciting people to riot and insurrection.
Yeah, and that's well said, Game Logic. I mean, that's really the purpose of the conversations. I mean, I'd like to think that we bring a different perspective than some of the stuff that I'm hearing in other podcasts, where it's rah, and let's rally the base and, you know, bring out the pitchforks and you know, and get the mob riled up. Like that's not what we're trying to do here. And so, Dr. Shannon Curry, this is where, and this is why we have these conversations. You say there are other ways that Sony can offset their costs instead of passing it down to us, but whatever. According to our logic, our views are just too simplistic. So this is exactly what So Dr. Shannon Curry, it's funny even saying that. What you just said is exactly why we're having this conversation. So, Dr. Shannon Curry, explain to me how you know, without any doubt, how you actually know that there are other ways that Sony can offset their costs instead of passing it down to the consumer. Like, please articulate that. Like, how do you know that?
And by the way, Dr. Curry, I didn't. If you had said that, I wouldn't have made the comment that I made. The comment that I made was based on a comment you made, which was simply prices go up, therefore I get angry, right? I would have loved to discuss this topic of other ways that Sony could go about offsetting their costs. I will say, again, from a person who works at a software firm in the tech industry, you know, a lot of my feeling and perspective, I say this right to lots of people all the time. One of the things that definitely shades my perspective is these are conversations that I don't have. I'm not going to have a discussion with the customer about price, right? We can negotiate, right? But I'm not going to get entangled in a conversation of justification, right? Because at the end of the day, customers who are not subject matter experts on that topic just don't know. And it's a different conversation that I'm going to have with another software engineering firm, right? And it's going to be grounded and based on the dynamics that drive the industry, right? And I'm definitely going to call their bluff if they throw something in my face that I think that they should know should be true or untrue, right? But with a customer who is not in that domain, who is not part of that industry, I'm just not going to get entangled into a conversation about price. I've had discussions with customers who say, well, you know, your guys' profit margins this and profit margins that. I'm like, that's not part of our conversation, right? I don't ask them about their profit margins, right? So I'm not going to be pulled into a conversation like that. And that's why I go back to, in fact, on my podcast before this, you know, one of my co-hosts brought up the notion of, I feel like this is a thing that Sony could have explained more and could have explained better. My personal view is, I don't know that I'm going to get entangled in a conversation. I'm the first one to say Sony has a horrible problem messaging, right? And typically does a bad job about it. But, you know, on this topic, am I going to get engaged with customers on the conversation of foreign exchange rates and what's going on in fab plants around the world based on them trying to convert their production lines over to smaller nanometer processes, and what the contentions are at TSMC versus other foundries? I don't think this is a case where I don't think I'm going to get entangled in that kind of conversation. I would you know, incredibly rare, put a pin in it on your calendar, right? Because this is a point where I'm going to agree with Sony's messaging, as I would have probably done the same thing and just laid it out flat. Like, it is what it is. Go off and make your decisions and not have spent a ton of time, right, talking about it. Yeah. If I were Sony, is my point.
Yeah, and that's so. This is the thing. Like I this is the issue I have with like the commentary, like with Dr. Shannon Curry saying they're a multi-billion-dollar corporation that can definitely find a way. I also work in accounting, have a bachelor's degree in business, but what do I know? Okay, you don't know their financials. You don't know their profit margins. There's a lot of things you don't know about their financials to kind of make that assumption. I think it would be fair to say, I wonder what else they could have done to maybe offset it. But to speak in absolutes, like that's a part that drives me crazy, because you don't know. And that's how these narratives start. And people make these assumptions and people run with it. And because it makes sense, people automatically, well, multi-billion-dollar, that means they're rich. That means they have a lot of money. That means they can afford to take hits. I mean, like, that's not how companies operate, number one. You should know that as an accountant, that companies don't operate to lose revenue, and they're going to try to mitigate any loss. And sure, if there are ways for them to, maybe kind of pass the buck around. They'll try to figure that out in creative ways, but you don't know that about them. And that's the part that drives me fucking bonkers.
And my thing, Dr. Curry, is I go back to why. Sure, I agree with you. There's a way to offset costs, right? I mean, hell, I could money launder and embezzle money, right? Like, if they really needed to, right? But again, I go back to why. If the demand for the product in the market exceeds market supply, why would I not increase prices? That is a tool that a corporation can use, and that is the choice that they made. What is the reason for them to make a different choice?
Yeah, I mean, again, that goes back to supply and demand, which I don't know, man. I feel like we're going in circles.
Right.
And again, like, look, I get, like, as a consumer, if you don't agree with that increase, you can just say no. That's again, and that's the part that, like, we keep going back, like, oh, they don't have to raise the price, they can do this. Okay, but they have raised the price. So at that point, you have a choice as a consumer to make. You either buy it or don't buy it. I mean,
right. And again, to give you the benefit of the doubt, Dr. Curry, this is, as I circle back around to this is kind of, I guess, starting to convince me that this is an insistence on being mad, right? In the face of alternative perspectives and alternative ways of thinking about it. If you're not insistent on being mad, then, like I said, let me know, right, what the reason is why they would, right, take another route. And a reason to take the other route, right? Let me just go ahead and answer the question for you. The reason to take another route is if they felt that it would blunt demand for their product in such a manner that it would negatively impact their revenue. I don't think that it is. I think that it's going to actually increase their revenue. Now, that's increasing their revenue in response to, in comparison to the fact that the most recent earnings report, they reported a downturn in the trend, right, year over year. So, again, I'm trying to sift through, like, again, if the alternative means that they could have of recovering the cost are more complex and more complicated and more risk prone, why would I do that when raising the price on it seems, from my perspective, to be an almost automatic guarantee, right, of aligning the business with my strategic goals?
Yeah, no, I don't think he or she's going to reply. But my thinking logic is just that, again, that they could have done this, or they're $1 billion company, so they could take the hit. And it's like, that's not how companies work. Like, I mean, I suppose that sounds great in theory, but they're not. If they can mitigate any financial loss, they're going to do that. They're not going to take the hit. And I think I was asking, who was it? Why am I forgetting his name now? Because it's getting late. What's his name? The guy that we had on last week. What was his name now?
David Faulkner.
Yeah. I think he said that based on his financial, or based on what he saw with their financials, whatever, he was estimating that had they not increased the price, they'd be taking about a $2 billion hit or something like that. And I'm thinking to myself, the first thing that came to my mind is $2 billion. The shareholders would be throwing a shit fit. They wouldn't be happy. People's heads might be on a spike for that internally at Sony. Yeah, they're not going to do that. So, anyhow. All right, well, mad love to everyone in the live chat. No, we really do appreciate everyone's perspective. But all right. No, thank you everyone for live chat for hanging out with us. Really do appreciate it. Again, we're not defending corporations. It's crazy I have to say that we're not. And we'll be back on Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern time. And yeah, everyone, I don't know, I guess enjoy. Sorry, it was a yawn. It's because I'm tired. Enjoy the rest of the evening, and we'll catch you guys on Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Yes, Dr. Shannon Curry, please come back and join us. Definitely appreciate having you in the live chat as well. But good night, everyone. We'll see you next time.